Well, this is another one of those retake recordings because the first one was technically very terrible. We are at Act 4, Scene 1 of Hamlet. It's a very short scene. It takes place immediately after Hamlet's conference with his mother, and she is with the king, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And the king is asking her what is behind her deep sighs. She asks Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to leave and tells the king of the deed of Hamlet, that is the slaying of Polonius. And he postures all about safety, and he uses it to his advantage to put forth his idea of sending Hamlet to England, which he really doesn't intend to do except to have Hamlet executed in England. And she questions it all, and she questions the consciousness of Hamlet, which she finds to be a strange mixture of sanity and madness. He's gotten to her. His talk, with its moral strength and its truth, has penetrated, and her conscience is now awakened. At any rate, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are summoned and have been told what has happened, and they are told to get the body and watch Hamlet. In Scene 2, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern encounter Hamlet, and they ask him what he has done, and he says he has returned dust to dust. He also derides them for being sycophants, but he is so subtle about it that they don't even get that they're being made fun of. Then they ask where the body is, and he toys with them and dashes off in sort of a game of moving hide and seek. And that's all there is to Scene 2. In Scene 3, the king is with several members of the court, and he tells them how he must be rid of this dangerous man, and how he must be careful in doing it because Hamlet is popular and he's desperate. Rosencrantz and all enter and say that Hamlet won't tell them where the body is. On command, Hamlet is brought in, and a witty, very witty conversation ensues. We'll try to read some of that. The king says, "Now, Hamlet, where is Polonius?" Hamlet says, "At supper." King says, "At supper? Where?" Hamlet says, "Not where he eats, but where he is eaten. A certain convocation of politic worms are e'en at him. Your worm is your only emperor for diet. We fat all creatures else to fat us, and we fat ourselves for maggots. Your fat king and your lean beggar is but variable service. Two dishes, but to one table. That's the end." The king says, "Alas, alas." Hamlet continues on, "A man may fish with the worm that hath eat of a king, and eat the fish that fed of that worm." King says, "What dost thou mean by this?" Hamlet says, "Nothing, but to show you how a king may go a progress through the guts of a beggar." King says, "Where is Polonius?" Hamlet says, "In heaven. Send thither to see. If your messenger find him not there, seek him in the other place. But if indeed you find him not within this month, you shall nose him as you go up the stairs into the lobby." And the king says to his attendants, Go, seek him here. Hamlet says, he will stay until you come. Very, very interesting thing. It's one of those things that happens again in this play. It happens very frequently in that there's a lot of talk about cycles. We're going to see more of it when we get to the final act. Things breaking down and entering something else. Is the whole idea of the same material being used again and again. It's clear that he's thinking about the spirit and the conceit of the consciousness of the spirit being bound up in material forms and not in some higher kind of reality. Hamlet is then told to prepare to be sent to England. And he seems to comply. But there's something very strange that happens. Hamlet says, for England? The king says, aye, Hamlet. Hamlet says, good. King says, so it is, if thou knewest our purposes. And Hamlet says, I see a cherub that sees them. But come for England. Farewell, dear mother. Thy loving father, Hamlet. Apparently, this is an open statement of some kind of a clairvoyant perception. He sees an angel, and he knows otherwise the intents of the king. He's very, this is no longer something that's based only in the senses and the physical. Hamlet has exceeded that. He's gone beyond seeing ghosts, and he has penetrated and obviously has a very inward kind of consciousness. Not one yet that he can act strongly from, but he does see things and he knows things. And what has happened is he's gaining more and more courage of conviction and a belief in the rightness of things, so that no matter what may come, he will be ready for it. When all but the king have left, he tells how he will send letters to the English who are friendly to Denmark, and they will execute Hamlet. So we can see that even though the king has had his moment of remorse and actually tried to pray but realized that he couldn't, his character was such that he couldn't, he's had the opportunity to repent, but he hasn't. He's relapsed in a way that we all do. We have good intents and we have high moments that we can see the purpose of it all, and we align ourselves with it. But when met with trial, because we're not really strong yet, just like Hamlet is not really strong, we lapse back into our old ways of doing things. He reverts to the concepts that come from material blindness. The idea is that at the fall of humanity, we lost our clairvoyance because we no longer divided our attention between the inward and the outward, and we turned our consciousness exclusively outward. And being unaware of the spiritual worlds, many people don't even believe that such exists. That matter is all there is, and this life is all we have of it. And so the materialistic consciousness leads automatically to death. If something is bothering you, you get rid of it. When you're rid of it, then you're a free person. This is the way the world thinks. In ancient times, people used to think in terms of a plague on the crops. They would pray and they would sacrifice and they'd say, what are we doing wrong? And they would seek atonement and they would seek to make amends so that things could go well again. We have a plague on the crops, and what do? We put more and more poison on our food. The poison comes back to us as carcinogens, and what do we do when we have cancer? We try to kill the cancer with more chemicals. It's like we have this whole philosophy because we are in this material blindness that we think that death and killing things cures things. So this is the way the king thinks. We do this sort of thing every day. If there are things that we don't like, we either just try to destroy them rather than strengthen ourselves so that we can live with them and transform what we're capable of transforming. We either try to destroy them or we repress. We try to hold things down. We try to not admit that things are realities that really are. So the two ideas of repression into an invisible unconscious, the very unconsciousness that we neglect with our outwardness, or we try to destroy the outer form. Hamlet cannot repress. He's awake and he's aware, and we have intimations now of clairvoyance. And he's under the press of his charge, his duty, but he's still diffident yet. In scene 4, his party en route to England encounters the captain of Fortinbras' army, which is on its way to fight the Poles. And they're fighting the Poles over a very small, worthless plot of land, but they each want ownership. Hamlet marvels over the stupidity of both sides by being willing to fight such a meaningless fight, and he berates himself by being so timid when he has a matter of great import, a matter not of just vengeance, because vengeance for Hamlet is justice, and justice is that the wrong that has been done be made right. There are different versions of vengeance, and this is the type that Hamlet has. Let's read some of that. Let's read line 31 to the end of the scene, which is where Hamlet is together with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and Rosencrantz says, "Will it please you to go, my lord?" And Hamlet says, "I will be with you straight. Go a little before." And so he's all alone by himself, and he delivers this marvelous soliloquy about this situation. "How all occasions do inform against me, and spur my dull revenge. What is a man if his chief good and market of his time be but to sleep and feed? A beast, no more. Sure, he that made us with such large discourse, looking before and after, gave us not that capability and godlike reason to fuss in us unused. Now, whether it be bestial oblivion or some craven scruple of thinking too precisely on the event, a thought which quartered hath but one part wisdom, and ever 3 parts coward. I do not know why yet I live to say this thing's to do. Sith, I have cause, and will, and strength, and means to do it. Examples gross as earth exhort me. Witness this army of such mass in charge, led by a delicate and tender prince, whose spirit with divine ambition puffed makes mouths at the invisible event, exposing what is mortal and unsure to all that fortune, death, and danger dare, even for an eggshell. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at stake. How stand I then that have a father killed, a mother stained, excitements of my reason and my blood, and let all sleep while to my shame I see the imminent death of 20,000 men that for a fantasy and trick of fame go to their graves like beds, fighting for a plot whereon the numbers cannot drive the cause, which is not tomb enough, and content to hide the slain. Oh, from this time forth my thoughts shall be bloody or be nothing worth. If you have a conscience, a tender conscience, as Hamlet obviously does, it seems as if everything in the world is speaking to you. And seeing this army going to war over nothing speaks to him. He says, I've got something to go to war for and I'm not doing it. At any rate, he's really awake and aware. When our conscience has been irritated or awakened, we get that way. In scene 5, there's a little bit more matter to the content. Horatio, the brother of Ophelia and the son of Polonius, is together with the queen, and when the queen has told her she will not see Ophelia, the gentleman impugns on her pity, describing Ophelia's distraction, and eventually Ophelia is let in, and there ensues a most curious kind of conversation between Ophelia and all that are present. Let's read some of that. It's at lines 4 through 73. A gentleman says to the queen, describing Ophelia, she speaks much of her father. She says she hears there's tricks in the world, and hems and beats her heart, spurns enviously at straws, speaks things in doubt that carry but half sense. Her speech is nothing, yet the unshaped youth of it doth move the hearers to recollect. They yawn at it, and botch the words up fit to their own thoughts, which as her winks and nods and gestures yield them, indeed would make one think there might be thought, though nothing sure, yet much unhappily. And Horatio says, 'Twere good she were spoken with, for she may strew vain dangerous conjectures in ill-breeding minds. Queen says, let her come in. And aside she says, to my sick soul, as sin's true nature is, each toy seems prologue to some great amiss. So full of artless jealousy is guilt, it spills itself in fearing to be spilt. Boy, is that a statement about Scorpio. Ophelia enters and she says, where is the beauteous majesty of Denmark? And the queen says, how now, Ophelia? And she starts singing. How should I your true love know from another one? By his cockle hat and staff, and his sandal shown. And the queen says, alas, sweet lady, what imports this song? And Ophelia says, say you, nay, pray you, mark, he is dead and gone, lady, he is dead and gone, at his head a green grass turf, at his heels a stone. Oh ho! The queen, nay, but Ophelia. Ophelia says, pray you mark, and she starts singing, white his shroud as the mountain snow, and she's interrupted when the king comes in, and queen says, alas, look here, my lord. And Ophelia sings, larded all with sweet flowers, which bewept to the graves did not go, with true love showers. The king says, how do you, pretty lady? And Ophelia says, God dild you. They say the owl was a baker's daughter. Lord, we know what we are, but know not what we may be. God be at your table. King says, conceit upon her father. Ophelia says, pray let's have no words of this, but when they ask you what it means, say you this. And she starts singing. Tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day, all in the morning betime, and I am made at your window to be your Valentine. Then up he rose and donned his clothes and duped the chamber door, let in the maid that out a maid never departed more. The king says, pretty Ophelia. And Ophelia says, indeed, la, without an oath, I'll make an end on it. And she sings some very interesting lines that are very telling. She says, by Gis and by Saint Charity, alack and fee for shame, young men will do it if they come to it, by cock they are to blame. Quoth she, before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. He answers, so I would ha' done by yonder sun, and thou hadst not come to my bed. The king says, how long has she been thus? And Ophelia, speaking almost out on her own, I hope all will be well. We must be patient. I cannot but choose to weep, to think they would lay him in the cold ground. My brother shall know of it, and so I thank you for your good counsel. Come, my coach. Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night, good night. And she exits. A very, very interesting conversation. We've said that numerous times in these talks we've mentioned that our lives are built out of the morals or kernels of myths and stories. Stories that are lived out by the gods, so to speak, because their life is in the principles. It is in the various powers of the creation behind the visible creation, and they live things out, and we create from their living. Actually, we'll create from their leavings, too. So, the meanings of our life live in the gods. And they are lived out in the lives of the gods. But that's not the same thing as concretizing them or as realizing them in the world that we are in now. We are the ones that carry them out. And they are carried out by first being focused through the mind. And in the mind, we produce creative archetypes. Not like the archetypes of Carl Jung, which are basically Platonic ideas. He himself said they were like Platonic ideas. We're talking about thought forms. Living, creative, powerful thought forms. And these thought forms then are the basis for everything concretely manifest. So when the cross-sections or the pieces of the myths and stories pass through the mind, they take on another quality. They take on the quality of the concrete mind. And the quality of concrete mind is pitch, or its intonation. And so an idea is given first a form in thought, and that form in thought is a tone. So there's a quality of tone. Like the tone of voice or something of that nature. So thinking from the spiritual point of view is a process of intonation. So the cross-sections of myths or the fragments of myths that become our lives and the episodes of our lives are something like songs. High mythology is like opera, or are these grand arias of great import. And popular music is the same thing lived on a lower level. And they're more like fairy tales, folk tales for the people. This is why music, and especially song, speaks to us. because it is the stuff of which our personality and our lives here in matter are built. So we're made of the same stuff as the stuff of songs, even though the stuff has been crystallized all the way down to our physical bodies. This is why some songs are meaningful to us. If we're in love with someone and that falling in love with someone happens together with a popularity of a song, we have the hackneyed old line, they're playing our song. Now, Ophelia has lost her father, and she's lost her sanity along with him. It's not so completely gone that she just sits there in a stare. She is somewhere between being completely otherworldly and not attached to the body at all, which would mean dead, and being lucid and having a connected consciousness from the spirit all the way through to the physical body. So that's what we say is she's insane. Now, the fact that she has lost her sanity with her father is something that the Freudians would have a field day with. So it's important that we look at that. They would say that his death represented a ruptured Oedipal process. Now, the Freudians claim that if you are in a female body, the psychology and your adjustment to the world is different than if you're in a male body. It's altogether different. To the Freudians, it all begins with mother love. And that our first love in life is our mother. But for a female, the love is transferred from the mother to the father. And then, from the father, it is transferred to who eventually will be her spouse. So what has happened here is that this path to a normal, healthy relationship, at least in Freudian terms, has been cut off by the death of her father. Now, for a man, it's very different. A man, his first love is his mother, and he's not going to be in love, at least usually not going to be in love with another man, so he doesn't have to go through the transference of love from the mother to the father and to another man. What he has to do is he has to first vie with his father for the love of the mother, but then he directly transfers from the mother to his spouse. And the Freudians claim that for a female, the extra step tempers some of the ardor and produces a kind of psychological maturity that is not found in men. Now, there's something to that, but it's only it isn't everything as the Freudians think. There's much more to life than that. Whereas the male is thwarted in his love for his mother, who becomes sort of like an enemy. And it's interesting the way it happens with maturity, because at first the child loves its parents like it loves no one else. They dote all their attention on the child, and the child grows up in that. But as the child comes into maturity, especially when the desire body is born at 14 and he starts thinking of mating himself, he has to transfer his attention from his mother to his lover. Now, this is more difficult, this transference of attention, because the male has a female vital body. The male, even if he had a womb, would not be able to really do well at bearing children, because he does not have the strength of the vital body that the female does to be able to carry that out. And so the male does not fare very well in transferring the attention or transferring the love. Now, Ophelia's case is a special case. It's even much more difficult. She's not only lost her father, but she has been verbally and openly rejected by the person that she would transfer her attention from her father to. So her options for love have been cut off, and there's nothing she can do. She hasn't cultured an inner life the way Hamlet has, so when she's cut off from the world, and she just can't go and love anyone else, she's thrown back on her own resources, and because she hasn't cultured an inner life, she's doesn't have the strength that Hamlet does, because he has done that. He's thought so much to the point that he thinks that thinking is to his detriment. So when the conscious ego is disabled or even weakened, the unconscious, with its imponderable power, cannot be stopped. That is to say, when we are in our physical nature, we would be overwhelmed by what is in the spiritual worlds, what is in our destiny from past lives, how minuscule and measly we are before all the gods. It's, in a way, a blessing at this point that we do have an unconscious. And if the unconscious is not kept in balance with a healthy relationship externally, because the external lover represents the internal opposite, which is our liaison with the spiritual worlds, when that is cut off and that balance is no longer there, the unconscious, or the content of the unconscious, using the Freudian or the depth psychology words, comes pouring in. And it can't be stopped. Now, how that word unconscious is used, it has many different meanings to many different people. To a modern mystic, it would mean everything between the physical, to which the individual considers personality to be, all the way to the self, the spiritual being the thinker, the doer of all things. So, that is everything that is of the unconscious. Some psychologists, and especially mystics, further subdivide the unconscious into the subconscious and superconscious. But you must remember, this is more like scrambled eggs than separate eggs from each other. So the subconscious would be the facets of the etheric vital body, the desire body, and the concrete mind, and the undigested activities we have going on in them, especially memories. The subconscious is filled with memories. So we have all of these things that we have collected in our desire bodies or in our minds, and those collections become complexes, or the Jungians call them constellations. So they are like entities made up of memories, desires, cunning, and such like that. They have a life of their own. In this context, the subconscious is usually under the control of the lower nature, that egoistic pseudo-self that has unconscious instincts built right into it. To the Freudians, and to some extent the Jungians, the subconscious conscious is the entirety of the unconscious. Freud pictured the unconscious as some kind of a groping mass of primitivity in us that needed to be worked with. Now, the Jungians do have a larger picture with a collective unconsciousness, which we would call the spiritual worlds and the beings in the spiritual worlds, and the idea of a self, which is in a much larger context than the Freudian nature, sees the way nature sees it. So we can see something of this collective unconsciousness in mysticism, but even for the Jungians, that collective unconsciousness is very primitive. They cannot transcend the idea of the personality. They cannot transcend the idea of the creations, ugly though they may be, rather than the creative being, the spiritual being. I think that probably comes from focusing so much on trying to solve the problems of the subconscious, as they would call it. Now, the superconsciousness is really a more mystical term. And though the mystics are very keenly aware of the subconscious, and we know that we have all sorts of things lurking in us, otherwise we would all be saints and we would all be doing spiritual miracles, but we know that there are unresolved things in our being that we have not cleaned up. So this is what is flowing in on Ophelia. All of these complexes that she had, all of this material from the subconscious, but also all kinds of higher things. And because she's no longer attached to the physical, she can speak of it in that round, symbolic way. She doesn't speak person to person. She sings songs. She's having perfectly reasonable conversations if one recognizes that kind of consciousness. Because people are being told what they need to be told and what they need to know, but she isn't saying, well, so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that. She sings a song, and the essence of that song is what she's communicating. So most people are not even aware of everything that goes on inwardly, all the way up to the self. Oh, there are a few people that have an experience of the Holy Spirit, and there are a few people that have an involuntary, cunning clairvoyance that they can understand what's going on in the inner world, but most people are asleep to it. Now, even though otherworldly, it's obvious that most of what Ophelia is doing is from the subconscious. No matter what way we construe the unconscious, it's clear that it's from the primitive side of things. She's not in some grand mythology or something like that. So her statements are sort of like a masterpiece of psychological understanding put into dialogue. Obviously, there's a lot of sexuality in her things, in the things that she's saying. And she's talking about the way it is with sexual things, and it's a comprehensible conversation. She's not just being elusive or evasive or beating around the bush. Some people do that. This is the way the inner worlds work. The more pointed and direct we become, the more the things slip away from us. Unless we can develop that consciousness that is both concentrated, and from that concentration an aura of understanding spreads out and encompasses those inner things. So Ophelia does respond to all statements and answers all questions and then some. She does a pretty good job of it. She does it all with snippets of songs, as we all do when we work from the unconscious. Very often, the self, the higher being within me, speaks to me by words of songs or titles of songs or things like that. It's when I'm not really paying attention to what's going on, or I'm not getting the gist of the bigger picture. So, I don't much subscribe to Oedipal thought, but their idea about the divine family does have, the Oedipal family does have something to say about it. And it is a principle that is prevalent. Probably a better way of looking at things for a mystic is to look at the Divine Father and the Divine Mother and the offspring. And if we look at different studies of Trinity, we get an understanding of a much deeper kind and a much more transcendent type. But the psychological context of family has something to offer it, and her subconscious is not restrained so that she can understand, and she knows very much what she has lost, and she knows it but from a different vantage now. It's obvious in all of this that mating, and that especially Hamlet, is the object of her desire. But she doesn't have to name it so. It goes so far that it is confused with religion. And Hamlet is, in a way, a savior to her. In one of her songs, she sings by Gis and by Saint Charity. The Gis is a contraction in early English of Jesus. So the figure of Hamlet is a savior to her, something that's going to take her out of the position that she's in now. Now, in depth psychology, there is a term that is called conjunction, or it's called compression. It's when two things or two desires are brought together so closely as to approximate an identity. And when that unifying desire brings two things together, it produces a conjunctive compound image. In mythology, we have things like centaurs or sphinxes or things like that. But it also happens in people when something intensely brings a unity. Well, we have two words such as luniac, which would be a lunatic and a maniac. But sometimes that conjunction or that compression or that fusion is one word that is very intensely compacted. And that's what Gis is. And it's not just for poetry. That's what it was in the Shakespeare of English, the English of Shakespeare's time. So, whoever Shakespeare may have been, he shows in many ways in the setting that we've just looked at an excellent psychological understanding and the ability to put things like that into words. Most people, when they run into what is called crazy talk, don't pay any attention to it. It moves them, but they don't understand the structure of it. They don't understand why it is as it is. And Shakespeare not only understood that, but he was capable of framing the speeches of Ophelia to do that. When Ophelia leaves, and Horatio is sent to watch her, the king gives his view of things which does not abound in psychological understanding. If you want to see the lowbrow side of it, let's read what the king says. Oh, this is the poison of deep grief. It springs all from her father's death. And now behold, O Gertrude, Gertrude, when sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. First her father slain, now your son gone, and he, most violent author of his own just removed, the people muddied thick and unwholesome in their thoughts and whispers for good Polonius' death, and we have done but greenly in hugger-mugger to inter poor Ophelia, divided her from herself and her fair judgment, without which we are pictures or mere beasts. Last, as much containing all these, her brother is in secret come from France, feeds on his wonder, keeps himself in clouds, and wants not buzzers to infect his ear with pestilent speeches of his father's death, wherein necessity of matter beggared, will nothing stick to our person to arraign in ear and ear. Oh, my dear Gertrude, this, like to a murdering peace in many places, gives me superfluous death. It isn't really even an understanding what he has uttered. He's taking everything and manipulating it to manipulate Gertrude and to give a rationale for the things that he's doing, which are not such sweet things. So he's got this cunning. We've seen it before when he's understood. He certainly can't understand the depth of consciousness of Hamlet, but he understands that Hamlet is an enemy. He's sort of like a dog that can understand danger in someone. Now he's using that cunning to twist other people to his ends, namely his wife. Now there are some things that are in this that are interesting. Insanity is for many people an unknown, like a UFO is an unknown. And when an unknown is presented, it's sort of like a vacuum. It draws people out, and people project into the unknown what they are. For me, for many times in life, when I need to know someone or want to know someone, I bring up the subject of UFOs. And people explain who they are by the way they respond. Recently, I was with a material scientist, a very, very bright scientist, and I wanted to see where he was at. And there were several other people around, and I brought up the subject of UFOs, and he comes out with the statement that there are no such things. And he belabors the point from a materialistic scientific point of view. And then a little later on in the conversation, I said, I use things like UFOs to understand people, because the way they respond to the subject indicates what their psychology is. And the other people in the group that I was with understood that's what it was, but this guy was still so much of a materialist scientist and so thinking that his prestige or everything that he had invested in science, he still didn't get that this is what I was doing, even when I told him. So it's really quite something. So the grief and sorrow is misplaced. We don't usually grieve for others. We grieve for ourselves. And that's part of what's involved in this. To see matters like this for what they really are, whether not to use them like the king does or to use them as an escape for our grief, we have to be impersonal. And in that impersonality only can we be altruistic, and can we have compassion. Because to see through things like this, we must have compassion and altruism to help. And so political expedience or things like that can only go so far, and they're back in that same mode again of destroy the enemy. At this moment, there is a ruckus at the door, and despite the king's precaution, a very belligerent Laertes enters. The queen would have Laertes physically restrained, but the king says that is necessary because he is a king, and kings are divinely protected. Wow, that's pure hypocrisy. What about the king that he murdered and the king whose wife he stole? He doesn't believe that for a minute. It's a bluff, and it can't be anything but a bluff. But bluffs sometimes succeed, and his does. So he's not a dolt. He knows that he's got some tools that he can use, but he deports himself in such a way that he is not attacked by Laertes, and to some extent manages to manipulate Laertes. A person who is in rage, flailing around in anger, can sometimes be manipulated pretty easily. And in explaining this, something comes out, and I don't know if there is a tendentious purpose to it or not. But along about lines 144 to 146, where the king is trying to persuade Laertes, Laertes is very noble about it all, even in his rage. He says, "To his good friends, thus wide I'll ope my arms, and like the kind life-rendering pelican, repast them with my blood." This is one of the strongest, or one of the clearest Rosicrucian symbols to come to us from the Middle Ages. The symbol is that there's a picture of it, and in the class I actually bring a plate out so that the students in the class could see the picture. It is the picture of a pelican piercing its own breast and picking into its heart and feeding its young. And this was the idea of sacrifice for others. Not only the sacrifice of a teacher for the students, but the sacrifice of one being to another being. Obviously, this is a reference to say that Laertes is willing to sacrifice his own life, but one wonders. I've read through the passage many, many times, and I see nothing that indicates that Shakespeare is trying to say something especially Rosicrucian here. It's like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, which are clearly Rosicrucian symbols, but why they're there, maybe they're just there, put in there as subliminal things without trying to have a hidden message. After the noise, there's another noise. Ophelia enters, and then comes one of those very strange conversations again, which we'll read because it's quite famous and worthily so. Laertes says, "Oh, how now? What noise is that?" Then Ophelia comes in, and he continues, "O heat dry up my brains, tears 7 times salt burn out the sense and virtue of mine eye. By heaven thy madness shall be paid with weight, till our scale turn the beam. O rose of May, dear maid, kind sister, sweet Ophelia, O heavens, is it possible a young maid's wits should be as mortal as an old man's life? Nature is fine in love, and where 'tis fine, it sends some precious instance of itself after the thing it loves." Wow, after that high-blown and very serious speech, she starts singing songs again. She says, "They bore him barefaced on the bier, hey nani, nani, hey nani, and in his face rained many a tear. Fare you well, my dove." Laertes, Laertes is of this world. He doesn't get it. He says, "Hadst thou thy wits and didst persuade revenge, it could not move thus." She sings, "You must sing a down, and you call him a down, a downa. How the wheel becomes it is the false steward that stole his master's daughter. Laertes says, this nothing's more than matter. Ophelia, she's got apparently a basket full of herbs and flowers, and she's starting to distribute them. And to him, she says, there's rosemary. That's for remembrance. Pray you, love, remember. And there is pansies. That's for thoughts. Laertes says, a document in madness, thoughts and remembrance fitted. He doesn't, he doesn't get the fact that thoughts and memories are of the same source. Ophelia continues on, there's fennel for you and columbine. There's rue for you and here's some for me. We may call it herb of grace o' Sundays. Oh, you must wear your rue with a difference. There's a daisy. I would give you some violets, but they withered all when my father died. They say a made a good end. She sings for bonny sweet Robin is all my joy. Laertes says thought and affliction, passion, hell itself, she turns to favor and to prettiness. He gets that something's going on, but he doesn't know what it is. And Ophelia continues singing, and will a not come again, and will a not come again? No, no, he is dead. Go to thy deathbed. He never will come again. His beard was as white as snow, all flaxen was his poll. He's gone, he is gone. We may cast away, moan, God of mercy on his soul, and on all Christian souls, I pray, God, God by ye. And she exits at that point. Whoa! It's quite something. It seems to be one of those direct versus indirect conversations. The indirect being of a much larger scope. And the only thing that's sad about this whole business is that we don't know the popular songs that she's singing and the context of them in society. What's interesting in this is Ophelia's emphasis appears to be more about her father than Hamlet, though both are alluded to, and she can't really seem to utter her real loss, which is Hamlet, because, you're going to lose the father anyway, and she didn't seem particularly attached to him. The Freudians would feel vindicated in this. Some would think that Shakespeare was ambivalent or random in presenting Ophelia in this way. I suspect there's something else going on. When a person has lost anchorage and grounding in the physical body, one loses the physical orientation and the pointed consciousness that comes with the consciousness that we have here in the physical world. One is then moved by whatever is strong in the psychic atmosphere. What's in the psychic atmosphere you pick up, or people who have lost touch with the physical or lost complete touch with the physical, pick things up and respond in that way. In the conversation previous to this, when she was speaking with the king and queen, Hamlet was the main topic of the conversation. And so things relating to bodiness and union with men became the topic of her songs. In this case, she's speaking with Laertes, who is obsessed with vengeance, and he's obsessed with the death of his father, and so her consciousness switches to him. Now, this might seem crazy, but I've experienced it myself. A long time ago, I was visiting a friend in a ward in a mental institution. I used to do quite a bit of that at one time. And it was an open ward. And as I was speaking with my friend, there were other people, so-called crazy people, around. And one of them comes and hovers around our conversation and starts talking about trapezoids. And this would seem like completely crazy, even crazier than Ophelia, who does have method in her madness. But at that time, I was doing a lot of pondering of spiritual mathematics, especially spiritual geometry. And I had ideas about what would be called Platonistic geometry in my consciousness that I had no one to tell about. And they were in me. And then this lady in the mental institution starts talking about trapezoids. And I knew intuitively that she was picking up on me, and she was picking up on me because it was strong in my consciousness, so she had no idea at all. And this is something that if you have your intuition and you have your wits about you, you can understand that what is going on. All right, this is one of the famous plant lore passages. The last time we encountered a plant lore passage, we had a little bit in Midsummer Night's Dream, but the last real encountering as such was in Winter's Tale. But there are differences between this passage and the passage in Winter's Tale. In Winter's Tale, flowers and the use of plants and flowers was much more general. It related to the flowers of a season, and it related to families of flowers, and it didn't relate to specific flowers. This is much more particular. It names specific plants, and obviously it intimates a plant language. It includes medicinal plants and not just show flowers, though they're both present. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a really good book on flower lore of the time. I've been looking for one for a long time, but I have never found one. Fortunately, I do have two herbals from contemporaries of Shakespeare. They were helpful, but not completely sufficient. They didn't get into so much into the poetic side of it. They got a little bit into the lore and mostly into the healing. So what we're going to say about the flower lore will be a little bit patchy. It won't be complete and thorough, and it may not be perfectly germane. The first reference is to rosemary, which is for remembrance, and pansies, which are for thought. Rosemary was ruled by the sun, and probably the sun in Aries, though that isn't necessarily stated, because it was the sun for the head. It is a purifier in the same way that sunlight is a purifier, and it is an awakener. That is, it's sort of like taking a whiff of it will bring your physical body to a state of alertness. And memories are often jogged because association with olfactory sensation in the center of the brain is associated with memories, such that we smell an odor, and when we smell an odor, a remembrance comes to us from another time we have smelt that same odor. So we're talking here about an herb that is awakening alertness in memory, but not as a nervine or as a tonic. That's be a different herb. Pansies are not the way we think of pansies here. We're thinking here of the hairy English violas. And they're not so strong in aiding thought, though they were used for soothing thought and used for insomnia. So we may have to trust Shakespeare on this one because we don't know for certain. So she certainly was speaking with Laertes, telling him to keep his memory fresh, or that his memory is strong in its freshness. But she's also telling him to keep his head. That is, let his thoughts cool him down. This is continued in the second reference when she offers him fennel. And fennel in Shakespeare's time was used to rid one of deadly poisons and cravings. And it was also soothing with its aromatic qualities. So it fits in pretty well. Then she offers columbines. It's not clear that they were offered only to Laertes, but it is columbines clear the liver. And the liver was known even in Shakespeare's time as the seat of passions. And this could even be offered to the king and queen because of the cuckolding that's going on. And so they are the clearers of the liver with a Venusian nature, which is more of a soothing nature rather than something like horseradish, which would clear the liver in a much more virulent way. She then offers rue to herself and others. And rue is ruled by the sun, and it is also for the head, but not for stimulating awakeness or memory, but for stopping fits and hysterias. So it's possible that it could also be for Laertes as well as for herself. She recognizes her condition. That's an interesting thing in all of this, that even though she seems to be out of it, she knows more about her condition than might be thought. Rue is noted for offering a graceful purging through sadness or through remorse rather than something more active. So it could be for the queen also. Then she moves on to daisies. And daisies are ruled by Venus and Cancer, which would have an extremely soothing and drawing and tempering effect. And they reduce swelling, and they heal wounds. So they could possibly also be for Laertes. Though they are, through daisy chains, associated with more sexual type of love, that might still be on her mind, but that isn't what is the normal use for daisies. That usage usually comes from violets. And when she says her violets have wilted, this is a very strong statement. Again, she's telling you where she's at in this roundabout way through flower lore. She ends up with a curious song about a dead old man and the finality of death, the grimness of death, which may refer to her father or to some kind of archetypal figure, which we will treat in a later talk in this series on Hamlet. Clearly, she's much more focused in the inner world, and the only way that she can share that is through the inner world understanding, the broad understanding. She's taking things that she has not words for, but that she has flowers for. She's using the flowers as symbols, and symbols are a vehicle for communication between this world and that. When she leaves, the king formally commiserates with Laertes and offers to be judged as the wisest of friends, saying that he'll even stake his own kingdom on it if he isn't helping Laertes to his end. Laertes accepts saying the unusual circumstances, the quick, quiet funeral and everything, he finds that a little bit questionable, but he submits to the reasoning of the king. Scene 6 is a very short scene in which Horatio receives letters from a sailor intended for the king from Hamlet. In the letter from himself from Hamlet is described how on the way to England they were overtaken by pirates, and in the battle with the pirates he entered the pirate ship in the struggle, and the other ship went on to England, but he's with the pirates. Scene 7 opens with the king and Laertes talking. It appears from the conversation that King has satisfied Laertes that he had no part in Polonius' death. Laertes wants to know why the king didn't persecute the criminal. The king says for 2 reasons. His mother dotes on him, and she wouldn't hear of it, which is not true. We haven't seen that at all. But this is a scoundrel. He hides behind her skirts. And the second reason, he says, is because Hamlet was very popular, and the public would not have stood for his assassination, and the whole kingdom would have gone in shambles. In this case, he's telling the truth. He's cunning. He mixes truth and lies together in quite a way. Laertes hears it, but he says he will still have his revenge, and his revenge is personal. It's not a justice revenge, it's a personal revenge. At this point, the messenger comes in with the letters for the king and one for the queen. The letters warn Laertes in the thought of revenge. The king tells Laertes he will have his heart's content if you let the king, take control, take charge of it. Laertes says that is fine as long as the king doesn't force him into some kind of peace or truce between himself and Hamlet. He definitely wants vengeance. The king says he has a way that will make it seem to the queen that it was an accident. Laertes says that's fine if he can be the agent. This is really a personal thing. The king flatters Laertes with reports about his ability and skill with the sword, and that Hamlet has heard of them also, and that Hamlet is envious. He butters the skillet a little more, telling that there is rumors that there was a Lamond who was a great swordsman that praised Laertes to the sky, while himself was a gallant. And he's got Laertes, the king does what he does with relish. He doesn't merely convince, he convinces with a sledgehammer and makes sure that things are the way he wants them. I guess that's the way it is with a murderer. The king tells Laertes that Polonius died by Hamlet's sword, and it would be fitting for Hamlet to die by Laertes' sword. Laertes says he'll put a deadly poison in his sword on the tip for just that very purpose. The king concurs and says if that doesn't work, here he comes again with the sledgehammer. He'll have a cup of poison for Hamlet when he thirsts, and he'll drink the poison. And at this point, the queen enters and reports of the death of Ophelia. This is quite a haunting passage. The queen says, "One woe doth tread upon another's heel, so fast they follow. Your sister's drowned, Laertes." Laertes, he says, "Drowned? Oh, where?" Queen says, there is a willow grows askant the brook, that shows his hoar leaves in the grassy stream. Therewith fantastic garlands did she make, old cornflowers, nettles, daisies, and long purples, that little shepherds give a grosser name, but our cold maids do dead fingers call them. There on the pendant boughs her crownlet weeds clambering to hang an envious sliver broke, when down her weedy trophies and herself fell a weeping brook. Her clothes spread wide and mermaid-like, a while they bore her up, which time she chanted snatches of old lauds. She's now singing hymns, as one incapable of her own distress, or like a creature native and endued unto that element. But long it could not be, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from a melodious lay to a muddy death. Hilarity says, alas, then she is drowned, and the Queen says, drowned, drowned. Now this is a fantastic, interesting coincidence, because Shakespeare describes how the willow leans over the creek, and that's a very good observation. And just this very morning, before doing this little talk, I read a newly published scientific paper about the reason willows are so good at producing fuel so fast has something to do with their leaning askance like that over the water, though the scientists didn't use the same words that Shakespeare did. Well, beautiful little things that happens. At any rate, this is one of the most haunting and powerful images in all of Shakespeare, perhaps in all of literature. Here we have a pure maiden with a wreath of flowers being suspended by her dresses, floating down a stream to her drowning death, and all the while singing hymns with no thoughts for this life at all. That's a real image. And this is another one of those cases where the image is intensified because it is narrated. We've seen that going all the way back to A Winter's Tale. The most intense images or the most intense emotional interactions are done by narration, because in narration, when the person hears it or reads it, they form the image in their consciousness, and putting themselves into the forming of that image, it becomes a stronger image or a stronger experience in general. I've been haunted by this image for years and the very power of it. And there's certainly some kind of pregnant meaning behind it, but I've never gotten exactly to what it is. For years I thought there must be somewhere in mythology an image that would throw light on it, but I've never found it. All that comes to mind is the death of Orpheus, when the followers of Bacchus rip him limb from limb. They throw his head into the river, the Maenads do, and his head sings as it's floating down the river, and it sings divine wisdom, solar wisdom, wisdom of Apollo. But that still is not enough for this image. It's similar, but I do not have a full understanding of it. There are images in the heavens, in pictorial astronomy, that bear further looking. At any rate, we're speaking more here of more than we are of a mad girl. This is not to extol or romanticize madness, because relative to clear consciousness, it's painful to see. But it does help us to see it in a different light. But this different or alternative meaning of life and death is not to excuse the macho utterance of Laertes. At this point, let's do a little bit moving into Act 5, Scene 1. We'll do it. We won't even cover the whole scene, but let's go a little ways into it, because at the time that these notes were made, we were pressed for time, and we had to get so much done in a certain amount of time. In the scene, two clowns are grave diggers. The beginning of the first line. Is she buried in Christian burial when she willfully seeks her own salvation? The other says, I tell thee she is, therefore make her grave straight. The crowner hath sate on her and finds her in Christian burial. How can that be unless she drowned herself in her own defense? The other, why, 'tis found so. The first clown says, it must be se offendendo. It cannot be else, for here lies the point. If I drown myself wittingly, it argues an act, and an act hath three branches. It is to act, to do, to perform. Argo, she drowned herself wittingly. The other says, nay, but hear you, good man Delver. Give me leave. Here lies the water. Good. Here stands the man. Good. If the man go to this water and drown himself, it is, will he, nil he? He goes, mark you that. But if water come to him and drown him, he drowns not himself. Argal, he that is not guilty of his own deaths shortens not his own life. The other says, but is this law? The clown says, aye, marry it is. Crown or quest law. The other says, will you in truth on it? And if this had not been a gentlewoman, she should have been buried out of Christian burial. Why, there thou sayest, and more pity that great folk should have countenance in this world to drown or hang themselves more than they're ever even christened. Come, my spade, there's no ancient gentlemen, but gardeners, ditchers, and gravers. They hold up Adam's profession. Or was he a gentleman? Aye, the first ever that bore arms. Why, he had none. Clown says, what, art a heathen? Dost thou understand the Scripture? The Scripture says that Adam digged. Could he dig without arms? Put another question to thee. If thou answerest me not to the purpose, confess thyself. The other says, go to. What is he that builds stronger than either the mason, the shipwright, or the carpenter? The other says, the gallows maker, for that frame outlives 1,000 tenants. Clown says, I like thy wit well and good faith. The gallows does well, but how does it well? It does well to those that do ill. Now thou dost ill to say the gallows is built stronger than the church. Argo, the gallows must do well to thee. To it again come. Who builds stronger than a mason, a shipwright, or a carpenter? I tell me that and unyoke. The other says, Mary, now I can tell. Clown says, to it. Mass, I cannot tell. At this point, Hamlet and Horatio come in. It's a very humorous section, very, very fun. In the past, we noted that there were few, if any, clowns in this play. Hamlet is very different that way, but here we do indeed have two, and the gravediggers. In previous plays, we saw how clowns such as Bottom the Weaver speak spiritual truths in an unexpected way. Very arcane and profound spiritual things are hidden in the jest of clowns. In Midsummer Night's Dream, we saw that the Eleusinian mysteries, where they were celebrated, was exactly the place where the action of the fairies and the clowns took place in Midsummer Night's Dream. Now, this is a frequent use that Shakespeare uses of the clowns, but he has another use. In Midsummer Night's Dream, when they acted a play within a play, they mocked the holier-than-thou attitudes of the aristocrats that were mocking the play. And it was to bring to the attention of the aristocrats watching the play, of the players watching the play within a play, that it was put that way. This is the principle of as above, so below. Now, when this was done, this wasn't meant to rabble-rouse, because probably the commoners, the groundlings, didn't even get what was going on. They just thought it was a funny little play going on. But it was merely to speak of things for the nobles, for them to hear, and to know that some of their things were not righteous, and that they abused their privileges. But that's exactly what happens here with these clowns, talking about because people are nobles, they can dodge the custom, and suicides can be buried as though they weren't something going against the grain of social custom, that they were given the full church burial. And there's a lot more that could be said about suicide, but this is getting to be awfully long, so I'm going to pass on that. Let's read a little bit more of this, and read what takes a little bit of what transpires between Hamlet and Horatio. Hamlet says, "Has this fellow no feeling of his business? Sings in grave making. Custom hath made him a property of easiness." Hamlet says, "'Tis e'en so. The hand of little employment hath the daintier sense." The clown is singing a song. "But age with his stealing steps hath clawed me in his clutch, and hath shipped me into the land as if I had never been such." He says that as he throws up a skull. Hamlet said, "Had that skull a tongue in it and could sing once, how the knave jawls it to the ground as if it were Cain's jawbone that did first murder. This might be the pate of a politician, which this ass now o'erreaches, one that would circumvent God, might it not?" "It might, my lord," Horatio says. Hamlet says, "Or of a courtier, which could say, 'Good morrow, sweet lord, how dost thou, sweet lord?' This might be my lord such an one, that praised my lord such an one's horse when I went to beggar. What might it not?" Horatio said, "Even so, my lord." Hamlet says, "Why, e'en so. Now my lady worms chapless, and knocked about the mazzard with a sexton's spade. Here, fine revolution, and we had the trick to see it. Did these bones cost no more, the breeding, but to play at loggets with them? Mine ache thus think on it." The clown sings his song, or continues his song, "A pickaxe and a spade, and a shrouding sheet. Oh, a pit of clay for is to be made, for such is guest to meet." And he throws up another skull. Hamlet says, "There's another. May not that be the skull of a lawyer with his quiddities, now his quilities, his cases, his tenures, and his tricks? Why does he suffer this mad knave now to knock about the sconce with a dirty shovel, and will not tell him of his action battery? This fellow might be in his time a great buyer of land, with his statutes, his recognizances, his fines, his double vouchers, his recoveries. This is the fine of his fineness, and the recovery of his recoveries, to have his fine pate full of fine dirt. Will his vultures vouch no more of his purchases, and double ones too than the length and breadth of a pair of indentures? The very conveyances of his hands will scarcely lie in this box, and must the inheritor himself have no more? Ha! Horatio, not a jot more, my lord. Hamlet says, is not parchment made of sheepskins? Horatio, aye, my lord, and of calfskins also. They are sheep and calves which seek out assurance. In that I will speak to this fellow. Whose grave is this, sirrah? Hamlet, this is really a stupendous contrast. And when you have contrast, especially ironic contrast, it's a powerful psychological device. And in this, Hamlet is extremely serious. But he is serious in it. There's a peculiar humor about it. It's an ironic humor. The irony is that even though Hamlet in his seriousness is surprised by the gold digger in his apparent indifference to skulls and death, he comes to the same conclusion. And the same conclusion is that death is indifferent to the professions of humans, any humans. Hamlet is still weighed down by the charge that's given to him. His ghost father gave him the charge to do, and he's still weighed down by it, by the seriousness of it. It's a life and death matter. But he's gotten so deep in his questioning that he wonders about the worth of any action. He's almost become an existentialist here, thinking it's all a joke. And especially petty actions like flattering, or fine little bit of ladies and lawyers and schemes of merchants and things like that. They all end up in the same soil. And he's literally questioning this, and he's seeing, is this all purposeless? Perhaps because he is not fulfilled or resolved in his own charge, he can only see purposelessness. Now, when we looked at the famous to be or not to be speech, we questioned whether that really was about fundamental existential importance. Whether it was really questioning being or not being, and not just having a suicide speech. Now we have an answer, or at least we have an answer for this stage in the development of Hamlet. We can say it's clearly yes, because his thought has gone round and round in his head. He sees all of these cycles going over again and again. And as it goes round and round in his head, he's evolved forward. So he's questioning the merit of any life, especially the life of vengeance. Now if we look at these speeches versus earlier ones, these are much more subtle. And they're much more speaking to all the nuances of human existence and what society is made of. Now, depth psychologists, we're using this as a play to discuss some depth psychology, have an idea that what we remember and what we forget are controlled by what is in the unconscious, and that the conscious use of them plays but a small part. There's sort of like a psychological determinism that causes us to not remember some things or forces us to remember others. And there is something to that. It's not the whole truth. It's true, but the thoughtful poet Jorge Luis Borges states that both remembering and forgetting are creative activities. which is beautiful. So if we look at this from a spiritual point of view, a mystical point of view, it's possible that if we were psychologically healthy and completely clear, with nothing, no guilt, nothing hanging of destiny in us, we would remember everything. This has been voiced by various people, like Krishnamurti, for example. But we know this from people like adepts, like Saint Germain, who had a memory of everything that had transpired. If you're perfectly clear, you can read the memory of nature. By the same token, such people do not live in memory. It's another one of those ironic paradoxes, because a person who is completely clear psychologically lives in the now, and everything is creative. Everything is new. So if we keep these things in mind, this section of what is included or what is excluded results in another meaning. Now, indeed, included in these speeches are Cain, the first murderer, a sycophantic courtier, cunning lovers, greedy, expansive proprietors. Excluded are everyone else, especially of high intent. So when he concludes that those who seek security in such activities are sheep and calves, he may also be saying that these are but animal characteristics, leaving the door open for a higher life. That these are the more base types of life. What he doesn't mention, or the people he doesn't mention, and the ones that he highlights, it's very subtle. When we continue this section in the next talk, when the skull of someone turns up that is known, the conversation takes a different turn. So Hamlet's state of soul may not be completely bleak. It's maybe not a nihilistic existentialism. There may be something more to it, and he has only this dark existential view about in connection with people who have a baser type of consciousness, and says nothing more about a higher type of life. Now, what constitutes a peculiar humor about this section is the juxtaposition of a carefree gravedigger and the burdened Hamlet. They both reach a similar conclusion, which really brings the point home quite strongly. It is not only the inclusiveness of death, but why about different conclusions that one can have about life because of it. All right, in the next in this series, we'll continue the reading, and we'll begin to get into the theme talks, which are, and in fact, this is the final theme talk, so it'll be very important going into grave matters. Thank you very much.